exactly a speaker or orator, particularly after personally. India, people have stopped, and you can see that in nervous also. But anyway, I'll be sharing what ideas I have got from Dr. Ambedkar's writings and his history, his life history. So, essentially here, when we talk about Dr. Ambedkar, when you just go through the web or when you go through the so-called modern narrative, you find that often the Hindutva groups have been accused of appropriating Dr. Ambedkar. Well, I have been a Swayamsevak from when I was 14. So, you have this stotra called Ekatmata stotra. Now, we have been talking about narratives, creating narratives. There have been two powerful forces that have been creating narratives in this country from bottoms up. It may not look very academic and all that if you are looking at it superficially. One is the Ekatmata stotra that is said by the RSS people every day, every morning in all the offices from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, where you have a sequence of personalities and events and places and the physical geography of the nation. Then there is Amachitra Kada by Anant Pai. They have brought us the real narrative of this nation. And what was interesting was that in both these narratives, in both Ekatmata Stotra as well as in Amachitra Kada, you find Dr. Ambedkar featured very prominently. So, when you read a book like Worshipping False Gods, or when you see the way Dr. Ambedkar has been used in the modern narrative against the onslaught against India and Hinduism, you always think that this man should be really anti-Hindu. Of course, he has talked a lot against Hinduism. He had made very harsh critical comments against Hinduism. So, it would be very easy to put him in the slot of being an anti-Hindu, a real very good weapon to beat Hindus with. However, the question was to me like, why then he was added into Ekatmata Stotra if he is such a virulent anti-Hindu and even anti-Indian if you believe Arun Shori. Then why his name was introduced into Ekatmata Stotra? And remember, Ekatmata Stotra has been with us from 1960s. And if you observe carefully, you will find that the anti-Indian forces or the so-called breaking of India forces, they started using Dr. Ambedkar in their posters, in their narratives only after 1990. The anti-Indian, anti-Hindu Ambedkar was the invention of 1990s along with Coca-Cola and the Che Guevara. Before that, there was no anti-Indian Ambedkar. Ambedkar was essentially a pragmatic nationalist. Well, that is what you discover when you go through his books, when you go through his writings, when you go through the very spirit of Dr. Ambedkar. In fact, there is a beautiful biography, people call it biography. No, it is a beautiful biography by Dhananjay Keer, the same person who wrote the biography of Veer Savarkar. And the importance of this particular biography is that, except the last chapter, he took the entire draft, he gave it to Dr. Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar checked it and he said, okay, he approved it. So this is the authentic biography of Dr. Ambedkar. And if there was not Dhananjay Keer, we would have lost a lot of context in which Dr. Ambedkar said a particular statement, made a particular statement. Okay, so what are all the aspects where the Hindu nationalists and Dr. Ambedkar come together? Being prolific writers, you yourself would have been aware of certain aspects of Dr. Ambedkar, like Dr. Ambedkar was very critical about Islam. Dr. Ambedkar was, in his last Constituent Assembly speech, he gave a very strong message of defending India with the blood. So I'm not going to touch all those things. And we will start with the basic aspect of what makes a nation. So, the first slide. So, at that time, the concept, there were two conflicting concepts of nationalism emerging. One was the territorial nationalism. Anyone who is born in this country, anyone who is born within the territory of India is supposed to be Indian. Then there is the cultural nationalism. The persons who adhere to the basic cultural and spiritual values of this nation, they are to be considered as Indians. So, for Dr. Ambedkar, the concept of nationalism, the concept of nation is basically that of culture, based on cultural unity, and he was consistent in that. You can go to the next slide. So, the next slide, please. So this is the particular quotation that is from Dr. Ambedkar's thesis submitted to Columbia University on caste. That is in 1960, and he is talking about the unity of culture that is the basis of the homogeneity. And he says that there is no other country in the world that can rival India in this particular aspect of the deep unity of culture that India has. Now, you can remove the name of Dr. Ambedkar, you can put Sri Aurobindo, you can put Swami Vivekananda, you can put Veer Savarkar, you can put Guruji Golwalkar, and you will find that this quotation could have been made by any one of them. And this was in 1960. So he is talking about more than the geographic unity, he is talking about the geographic unity of nation, and he is telling there is also an underlying deep cultural unity. And the next slide, please. Now this is in 1941, in Thoughts on Pakistan, when Dr. Ambedkar is talking about the nature, what makes actually a nation. Remember, at that time, the Marxists have come up with this idea about each and every language people are a separate nation. So Tamils are a separate nation, Malayalis are a separate nation. In fact, when the cabinet mission came from the British, the Marxists went and they submitted a referendum to the cabinet mission, British cabinet mission, telling that they should divide India into different linguistic states with the freedom to secede. So at that particular time, when this particular idea was taking place, he says that spirituality is the basis of any particular nation. And remember here he says that there is not much unity between Pakistan and Hindustan, but there is unity between Hindustan and Burma, which is basically a Buddhist nation. So here I would like to differ from what the previous speaker had talked about. The previous speaker has talked about. He said that Nepal and India, despite the fact that they practice the same religion, they are different nation states. Of course, they are different nation states, but they are part of one cultural whole. So, but Pakistan is not. But remember, this particular statement is made before Pakistan became a reality. So, what does actually he mean by Pakistan here? He doesn't mean the landmass of Pakistan. He essentially means those people who harbor in them the values of Pakistan. With those people, you cannot have any particular brotherhood. The brotherhood has to be there with those people who share the cultural and spiritual values. And that is the spiritual nationalism. So he is talking about the cultural nationalism and spiritual nationalism. See the years different, 1916 to 1941, there is a consistency. And I will follow up this consistency with another one quotation that is not here. 1955, just 1 year before his parinirvana, Dr. Ambedkar wrote a book on the linguistic states. So the demands have started that the nation should be divided into states based on particular language. And Dr. Ambedkar says in the preface to his book, when India was divided, I was almost the prophet of partition. I was happy that India was divided because if there has been a considerable number of, he didn't mince the words, so I can use his words with themselves. If there has been a considerable number of Muslims here, Hindus would never have become free. You would have attained independence, but you would have never become free. So I was happy that when partition happened and Muslims moved over there, I was happy a curse on this nation has been lifted and Hindus has, he is not using the word Indians, he is using the word Hindus. Hindus have attained unity. But with the linguistic states, I am afraid that particular unity may be lost. Then he says, so it should not be like one state for one language. It should be one language for one state. That means you are not creating a Tamil Nadu for Tamils. You are creating Tamil Nadu for all citizens of India. All citizens of India can be there, but Tamil can be used as an administrative language for that particular state. Then there should be Hindi, which should be the connecting language of all, because he has already tried to make Sanskrit the national language, because being prolific writers again, you would have been known about all those things in the Google. You could have seen the paper clippings and all that, where Dr. Ambedkar argues for Sanskrit to be the national language of India. If it is not Sanskrit, it should be Hindi in Devanagari Lipi. He says all the states that divide themselves as, identify themselves as linguistic states, they should accept Hindi with the Devanagari as the basis. Otherwise, they don't have a right to exist as separate states. So the point is, there is a consistency here. You can see that. He uses the word Hindus here as synonymous with cultural and spiritual Indians. So, from 1916 to 1955, you find a consistency in this concept of nationhood. That is very important. That is axiomatic. That is something axiomatic that Dr. Ambedkar and the Hindu nationalists share. And so, you talk to any secularist, you can be sure, you can count 10 in your mind, and within you finish counting 10, he would say that, then what about the Aryan invasion? So, Dr. Ambedkar was the first person who studied, basically, of course, there was Sri Aurobindo, the Swami Vivekananda, the spiritual giants and savants. They have said that Aryan invasion theory is all nonsense. But in the political arena, it was Dr. Ambedkar. Like a good social scientist, he went and he studied the Vedic scriptures, and he wrote the book Who Were the Shudras, and in that he came to the conclusion, as you can see, that the Vedas do not know of any such race as Aryans. There was no invasion. The distinction between the Aryans and the Dasyus was not a racial distinction, and that the Vedas do not support the contention that Aryans were different in color from the Dasas or Dasyus. We have to understand one thing very clearly. Whenever we are talking about Aryan invasion, the press, whenever it reports our position, it says, the Hindu nationalists believe Aryans to be indigenous. No, we don't believe Aryans to be indigenous. We say that Aryans is not a race. There was no such race as Aryans. All Indians are Aryans, because Aryan is a term that has been used to denote the noble persons. The noble person, when the Buddhists were having the upper hand, the Buddhists called their dharma as Arya dharma. So, in Tamil Nadu, even today, the head of the family is called Ayya. The Tamil teacher has to be called Ayya, which is basically a changed form of the word Arya. Essentially, the meaning is the same. So, Aryan is not a racial term, it denotes everyone in this nation. That is what Dr. Ambedkar says. And, next slide. The same thing is true with Swami Vivekananda also. Dr. Ambedkar wrote another book about the so-called untouchables. And in that, he was talking about Tamil could have been the language that was spoken throughout India. It is a contentious issue. We don't have to go into it. But all I want to point out is, Swami Vivekananda had a similar view about that. So, that is one aspect I wanted to share. That Dr. Ambedkar and Swami Vivekananda had a converging view. I'm not going into this anyway. Next slide, please. So again, remember Dr. Ambedkar or Veer Savarkar or Swami Vivekananda, when they were there, even the Europe's finest humanists thought race was a biological reality. So for them, the Negroids are a separate race, the Mongoloids are a separate race, and they themselves were separate race, and they had the Hamitic myth and all that. But Swami Vivekananda says very clearly that all races mingle together to create one common humanity. So this is exactly the kind of statement that Dr. Ambedkar makes in both his books, Who Are the Shudras, Untouchables, Who They Are. He says that the Shudras were sort of fallen Kshatriyas, and the so-called untouchables were the result of later political problems with the Buddhists and the Hindus. And he has another one beautiful book called the Counter-Revolution, Brahminism and Counter-Revolution. Remember, he uses the term Brahminism as a kind of a provocation, but he also has a secular term for that. He says social stagnation. And we have to look at his entire work from the point of view of two forces that are operating in the society. One is the forces of social stagnation, whether it is Buddhism or whether it is Vedic religion or whether it is Jainism. There are forces of social stagnation, conservatism, which operate in the society. Then there is also the forces of social emancipation. If you take, for example, Upanishads, you have the voices of social emancipation. If you have, for example, if you take, for example, the voice of Ramanuja, it is the voice of social emancipation. So, even in Buddhism also, there has been forces of social stagnation. For example, Buddhism was becoming more and more patriarchal. And if you take Jainism, Jainism in Tamil Nadu in particular was tending towards creating untouchability. These kind of things happen. So, social stagnation does not belong to any particular ideological group. Social stagnation is a social phenomenon that happens with the economic and political conditions of a particular society. But social emancipation comes from the spiritual power of that particular society. We have always had voices of social emancipation, and we have to identify whatever Dr. Ambedkar talks about the counter-revolution in India with the forces of social emancipation cutting across the Buddhist, Jain, Vedic, Saivite, Vaishnavite religions, the entire Indic religions. Right, the next slide please. So, whatever Dr. Ambedkar said about the Aryan-Dravidian invasion, it has been proved by modern genetic studies. So, we can go through it during the QA session. We can go to the next slide please. So, this is again related to that. There are basically Aryan invasion theory. Aryan invasion didn't happen. What Dr. Ambedkar wrote in 1946 has been validated again and again. This is important because whenever you talk about Indian history, we always talk about discovery of India. Well, discovery of India is very good, but he asserted everything that the Westerners said about the origins of India. But Dr. Ambedkar took the efforts to go to the Vedic scriptures themselves, Vedic texts themselves, and then in the preface to Who Were Shudras, Dr. Ambedkar makes an important observation. This book will be used by those Hindus who want to rejuvenate the Hindu society, he says. Only those sections of Hindus will be using this book. And I say you, from the time this particular book was written to this day, the only people who have the guts to quote from Who Were the Shudras are the Hindu nationalists. Nobody else could quote it because it goes against their idea of Aryan invasion. So we go to the next slide, please. Right. Now we come to a crucial point. Well, Dr. Ambedkar was very critical of caste system. True. And it is a tragedy of Indian society that a person like Arundhati Roy has to write a preface to this particular book's new edition. Very clearly, the lady didn't go through the entire book. Had she gone through, she would have got real frightened by the whole, what exactly he aims to achieve. So, as a preamble to that, I will say one thing. Mahatma Gandhi has launched his magazine Harijan, and he wanted Dr. Ambedkar to send a message for his magazine. And Dr. Ambedkar sent this message, in which he says that nothing can help the save Hindus and ensure their survival in the coming struggle except the purging the Hindu faith of this odious and vicious dogma. What do you mean by the ensure their survival in the coming struggle? He envisioned the entire greater Indian landmass as a battlefield in which Hindus were becoming more and more endangered. So he wanted Hindus to get united and become strong. And he saw caste standing between them. In fact, he observes in another one place, he observes Hindus are the communal majority in India. This is the question often. All Hindu nationalists, when they get together, when they have a small talk, they come to this particular point. They say, oh, we Hindus are majority, and yet nobody cares about us. Dr. Ambedkar very specifically points to what is the problem. He says Hindus are the communal majority in India, but Hindus are not the political majority in India. When we go to vote, we go to Dalits, we go to OBC, MPC, MC, Brahmins, non-Brahmins, non-Dalits, we never vote as Hindus. So that is the problem that we have. Dr. Ambedkar clearly points out that. So he says, for Hindus to get united, caste system has to go. That is the reason why he wants caste system to go. In fact, he makes another one very interesting, very powerful observation. He says, more important than obtaining Swarajya and defending Swaraj, what is more important is protecting the Hindus in Swarajya. That is the most important thing. You can attain independence, and after that you allow Hindus to become extinct, then India would never remain as India. So what is more important? The most important thing is protecting Hindus. Create a state where Hindus will not be feeling that they are under siege. So that is the important thing. That is what Dr. Ambedkar says this. That more important than protecting the Swarajya, it is important to save the Hindus in the Swarajya. So that is why he wants the annihilation of caste. Of course, he wants the annihilation of caste because, as Sri Aurobindo said, caste was an undemocratic system which is against the very principle of Hinduism. I will come to that later. But now, should we go to the next slide? So this is from the annihilation of caste, and this is the point our Arundhati Roy and all the progressives who talk a lot about this annihilation of caste text miss it. He says caste has to be annihilated because he uses a very militant term, I would say, a very militant term. The Hindu Sangathan will not be possible without the annihilation of caste. That is why caste has to go. So Hindu Sangathan is a term that Swami Shraddhananda was using, if you remember. So he is saying this. Hindus take any insult laying down because there is no Sangathan. Anybody can come and insult you. Anybody can make a movie and they can insult you. Anybody can make a remark in the parliament, they can insult you. In fact, in Tamil Nadu, we face it every day in and day out, even though Hindus are majority, because Hindus are divided. There is no Sangathan. So that is the point he is saying, that indifferentism is the worst kind of disease that can infect a people. Why is the Hindu so indifferent? In my opinion, this indifferentism is the result of caste system, which has made Sangathan and cooperation even for a good cause impossible. Note these lines. Even for a good cause impossible. That no wonder Dr. Hedgewar invited Dr. Ambedkar for the Makar Sankranti festival in the RSS. It will be very interesting because when RSS was banned, Guruji Golwalkar went and met Dr. Ambedkar. And Dr. Ambedkar's AD makes this. Guruji Golwalkar is not making this claim. Ambedkar's assistant who was with him, he has written a book about that particular period of Dr. Ambedkar's life, and in that he says, Dr. Ambedkar said, when this issue comes in the parliament, Patel being a very patriotic person, he would support you and I would also support you. So, Dr. Ambedkar was very clear in his views about nationalism, about Hindu Sangathan, what should be done to destroy the caste system, what should be done to dilute caste system. So this is a very important aspect of his view, that he wanted Hindus to become a healthy, strong, united body. He was not anti-Hindu at all. And of course he was harsh on Hindus. Well, when I was 10 years old, when I failed in my exams, my father told that you are useless. Why I should be sending you to school? I should send you to rare buffaloes and all those kind of things. Well, I know he didn't mean all those things. He was harsh on me and it really hurt, but he was doing it for my own good. Something that Veer Savarkar understood. When Dr. Ambedkar's 50th year came, there was a magazine released in his honor in which Dr. Ambedkar, Veer Savarkar, made a very beautiful, wrote a very beautiful article in which he says, of course, Dr. Ambedkar has attacked Hinduism in a very bad way, but that is all done because he wants Hindus to reform and he wants Hindu society to be stronger. So when Veer Savarkar says that, you know, and very interestingly, the person who was given the charge of organizing his 50th year celebrations was Barrister Jayakar, who was also Hindu Mahasabha leader. We will talk about Dr. Ambedkar's Hindu Mahasabha connections later. Okay, next slide please. Yeah, so he had very great respect for the Hindu nationalist leaders. You know, at that time, there was a competing space between the Congress and the Hindu Mahasabha, and Hindu Mahasabha was of course losing because most of the Hindus, majority of the Hindus sided with the Congress because Congress has already captured and positioned itself as the voice of nationalism. Hindu Mahasabha is being a small minority. Even today, the political Hindus are a minority in India. So, Hindu Mahasabha being a small minority, they were striving for social reforms, particularly under Veer Savarkar. Even in Hindu Mahasabha, there was orthodoxy, that is another one aspect. But it was striving for reform. So, Dr. Ambedkar wrote to Veer Savarkar, and these are the lines. Like, So you are one of the very rare persons who have understood that untouchability is a problem and it has to go. In fact, Veer Savarkar was very clear. He said that not only untouchability, the caste system based on Shastras itself is disease of the mind, that it should go. That was the stand taken by Veer Savarkar. So Veer Savarkar and Dr. Ambedkar were on the same wavelength when it came to the annihilation of caste. Next slide, please. And then we come to this particular aspect, that how Dr. Ambedkar and Veer Savarkar also converged on another one aspect. Many of us, even many of us here, we always tend to think that Hindutva is a political ideology of Hinduism. But if you go through the essentials of Hindutva written by Veer Savarkar, you will find that Veer Savarkar says very clearly, Hinduism is only a subset of Hindutva. Because Hindutva is, we are talking about again the grand narrative, and here Veer Savarkar says that it is the grand holistic narrative that encompasses the social, spiritual, historical dimensions of the Hindu life. And into it, Sanatana Dharma or Vedic religion, the Sikhism, Buddhism, everything is just part of that great, they are all streams in this great ocean of Hindutva. So Hinduism is only a subset of Hindutva, and read this particular quotation that it came in 1920s. Veer Savarkar's Essentials of Hindutva. Clearly, it had made an impression on Dr. Ambedkar, because Dr. Ambedkar says about temple entry program, he says, he's not talking about entering the Hindu temples. He is talking about entering the temples of Hindutva. And he says, Hindutva belongs as much to the untouchable Hindus as to the touchable Hindus. Again, you can take this whole quotation, you can remove it, and you can put any Hindutva leader today, and the secularists will tell you that it is a very communal, dangerous quotation for the unity of India. So now he says that the temple built in the name of Hindutva, the growth and prosperity of which was achieved gradually with the sacrifice of touchable and untouchable Hindus, must be open to all the Hindus, irrespective of caste. Now, this is something where Veer Savarkar and Dr. Ambedkar stand together. Go to the next. So, the same thing is also reflected in the definition of Hindu by Veer Savarkar. You know that very famous definition of Hindu. He says that Hindus are those who consider this land from Himalayas to the Kanyakumari as the sacred land and the father's land of them. And Dr. Ambedkar basically he writes about this in his thoughts on Pakistan. He says this particular quotation by this particular definition by Veer Savarkar is very good, because before that Tilak has tried to define Hindus. He has said that Hindus are those who believe in Vedas. Now he says, what about the tribals? The tribals don't even know the name of the Vedas, but are they Hindus or not? So Veer Savarkar's definition, which says that anyone who considers this land as Punya Bhumi, and of course for the tribals, the land they were live is a Punya Bhumi for them. So anybody who considers this land as Punya Bhumi, they are Hindus. And this definition is very good, because it excludes, he says, all those Muslims, Christians, Jews and Parsis, and it includes Buddhists, Hindus, Arya Samajis, Brahma Samajis, Saivis, Vaishnavites, Vedic people, and it gives what you can call a broad Hindutva definition. We'll come to the next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide? Then, after 1941, in 1950s, when Dr. Ambedkar was drafting the bill, he uses the same definition of Veer Savarkar. You can see that. He, of course, doesn't mention the Punya Bhumi and the fatherland and the Koli land aspects, but essentially what he says is the same. Anyone who is not a Jew, who is not a Parsi or a Christian or a Muslim, all the other people, Arya Samajis, Brahma Samajis, everybody, they are all Hindus. So this forms the basis of the Hindu unity that we Hindu nationalists talk about. When we say the tribals are Hindus, we stand with Dr. Ambedkar and Veer Savarkar, and we say that the tribals are Hindus. The founding father of Indian Constitution, the chief architect of Indian Constitution, says that tribals are Hindus, Buddhists are Hindus. In fact, people asked him, how you can say that Buddhists are Hindus? He said, when Buddha differed from Vedic religion, he differed in certain creeds, certain aspects of Vedic religion, but the legal system, the social system, he kept intact. The same is true with the Sikhs. So they were all legally Hindus. So this is another one important aspect. When he was quoting the Hindu Code Bill, remember, including Dr. Syama Prasad Mukherjee, many people opposed it. But the two people who were very important in implementing the Hindu Code Bill, Jawaharlal Nehru and Dr. Ambedkar, they both had two very different targets. For Jawaharlal Nehru, it was just to show the state supremacy over the Hindus. For Dr. Ambedkar, it was an entirely different game plan. He says in an interview, the particular Hindu code bill that I have created is entirely based on Hindu Shastras, and it is going to be the common civil law of India. Now that is almost like saying India is going to be a Hindu state. That is a very strong statement that comes from Dr. Ambedkar. So the next slide please. Yeah. Now we come to the Hindu nationalist connections that Dr. Ambedkar had. Dr. Ambedkar always held in high respect. If at all he held, if you want to search for those persons whom he held in high respect, you make a list of all those persons whom he had not criticized much. You will find all those individuals were invariably, mostly from Hindu nationalist group. Of course, he declared on stage that Marxists are my traditional enemies. Communism is my traditional enemy. And today, when you see posters putting Dr. Ambedkar along with Mao and Marx, that is the worst thing that can be done to the memory of Dr. Ambedkar. He says, Marxists are my worst enemies, my traditional enemies. And he rejects their idea that religion is the opiate of masses. And the same person held in high esteem those persons who belong to internationalist groups. So that's Swami Shraddhananda. He said that Swami Shraddhananda is the most sincere champion of the untouchables. The greatest and the most sincere champion of the untouchables. If you ask a Gandhian narrative builder, he would say that the conflict between Gandhi and Dr. Ambedkar was that Ambedkar wanted to be the greatest champion of Dalits, but Gandhi was already occupying that space. So Dr. Ambedkar was sort of envious about Gandhi. So this particular statement by Dr. Ambedkar shows that he was not at all envious of Gandhi. He had other problems with Gandhi. So he says, Swami Shraddhananda was the greatest and the most sincere champion of the Dalit people. And you know that Swami Shraddhananda was the Hindu Mahasabha leader who was assassinated by Hindus. Right. And the other persons whom he admired greatly, they are M.R. Jayakar, who was a Hindu Mahasabha leader, he was a strong Hindu Mahasabha leader. And he was the person who also was the first person to ask for reservations for scheduled community people in the police forces. Then there is Dr. Narayan Bhaskar Thare. He was a very great man. He and Dr. Ambedkar worked together in the Viceroy's Security Council during Second World War. And he was the reason why today South Africa is not an apartheid state. Dr. N.B. Kare was the first person to move to UN about the plight of Indians in South Africa. It was not Gandhi, it was Dr. N.B. Kare who put the seeds for ending of apartheid in South Africa. Then you have a very interesting person, Baba Saheb Bole. You can see the intimacy there, that he is sitting on the lap of Dr. Ambedkar. This was taken in 1951. And so intimate to Dr. Ambedkar. He was also a provincial Hindu Mahasabha leader, and he met Dr. Ambedkar at the airport and he with a proposal that saffron flag should be declared the national flag of India. No. Dr. Ambedkar said, okay, I would make, if you are creating a people's movement for demanding that saffron flag be made as the national flag of India, I would support it. So, if you see, he is also, yes, Baba Saheb Bole, even Dr. Ambedkar used to call him Baba Saheb Bole. And Baba Saheb Bole was the person who first passed a resolution saying that the scheduled community members should be allowed in public streets. They should be given all. They should be given all uniform. They should be given access like any other Hindus for all public places of worship and everything else. So it is called Bole resolution. Now this also shows that the kind of thing that people want to say that we are all very so-called pro-upper caste and anti-Dalit and all that is historically nonsense. If you go through the history of Dr. Ambedkar and if you take each and every person for whom he had high regard and check, then you will find that Hindu Mahasabha was not a very orthodox, backward fundamentalist force at that time. Or otherwise, Hindu nationalism was not an orthodox fundamentalist force. This was a progressive force. In fact, it made more contribution to the emancipation of scheduled community members, the marginalized sections of the society and women. I will come to particular aspects here. We all know about the Sharda Act. The Sharda Act was the only act that was responsible for giving complete empowerment to women by increasing their marriage age. The act was brought by Harbilas Sharda, who was a Hindu nationalist, who wrote the book The Superiority of Hindu Civilization. And this Harbilas Sharda's Act, for passing this Harbilas Sharda's Act, Dr. Ambedkar was one of the major crusaders fighting for the implementation of this particular act. You have to forgive the use of the term crusaders, of course. And when he was in London for the Roundtable Conference, he wrote to his magazine Janata, in which he wrote very clearly that do not, the Dalits, the scheduled caste, the scheduled community members have a tendency to believe Muslims, and they always think that they are their friends. It is not so, because the Islamic delegation to the Roundtable Conference was against India obtaining Swaraj, because if India obtains Swaraj, the Sharda Act would be implemented, in which case the child marriage would be threatened. So, do not trust the Islamist forces. He wrote this to Janata, his magazine. Dr. Ambedkar wrote from London to Janata, his magazine. So, the point is, Hindu nationalists and Dr. Ambedkar converged even in matters of gender emancipation. Next slide. And of course, we all know about how Manohar Malgonkar has brought out how Dr. Ambedkar talked to the council, legal council of Veer Savarkar, how the Nehru government has trained him and all that. I won't go into the details of that. You can go to the next slide. And it comes to saving of Hindus in Pakistan. Dr. Ambedkar was extremely upset about Hindus being stranded in West Pakistan and East Pakistan. He was again and again telling the Nehru government, send an army inside and rescue the people. Here, Jinnah made a statement. He said that, like the inanimate objects, that the Dalit population, the scheduled community population in Pakistan should be kept as slaves, should be kept as Pakistani property. They should not be allowed to come to India. So, Dr. Ambedkar was very much pained. He said that we should send a regiment inside and we should rescue them. And remember, the Magar regiment was created by Dr. Ambedkar's, because of Dr. Ambedkar's efforts. And in Thoughts on Pakistan, he says the reason for that. Our great national leaders in their whatever vision they had, they have said that we should not get ourselves enrolled in the British Army during the Second World War. And this had an alarming effect on the demographic nature of Indian Army, that Muslim youths were enrolling themselves, the number of Muslims were increasing. Dr. Ambedkar makes it a point to mention this in Thoughts on Pakistan. This is not a very good trend, he says. And so, both Veer Savarkar and Dr. Ambedkar wanted Hindu youths to join the British Army during the Second World War. It served us in two ways. One was, the army was demographically safe for free India. Number two, the soldiers who joined the Indian Army were instrumental in joining INA and securing freedom for India. In fact, you know that Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose in his Azad Hind radio talks actually expressed his thanks to Veer Savarkar for making youth join Indian National Army, and that gratitude actually should, Dr. Ambedkar should also be shared with them. Right. So here Dr. Ambedkar says that he wrote to Nehru that he should send the regiment and he should save the Hindus. And again, in the case of East Pakistan, Dr. Ambedkar was property. He said that we are making our people hostages and this is going to create big calamity. You know that it created a big calamity, 1971 genocide of Hindus. And in fact, it would have been done by Yahya Khan, but the chief architect of that particular genocide, the seeds of that genocide were put by none other than Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, because he was the one who stopped the Hindu refugees from East Pakistan come over to India. So we go to the next slide. Now, we come to certain other aspects of Dr. Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar, unlike the Marxists, as I said earlier, unlike the Marxists, for the Marxists the society was supreme and the individual doesn't have a self. But for Dr. Ambedkar, his battle was spiritual. So he said that he is born for, a man is born not for the development of the society alone, but for the development of his self. So this is something very, very Vedantic in nature, as you can see. right? So his very basic philosophy, it differs from the Western concepts of either it is Max Weber or it is Karl Marx. His is essentially rooted in Indic tradition. Next one. So you can see a similar quotation from Swami Vivekananda when a particular person asks him, this was in London in 1896, I think. So he says that in the East he aimed at the development of self, whereas the West aimed at the development of social state. Swami Vivekananda says that it is not so. There is the apparent self and the real self, because the development of the self automatically reflects on the social institutions as well. So we go to the next slide, please. So I think this is, I don't know whether it is very clear, but this is a very important thing. You know, Dr. Ambedkar has written a book called Riddles of Hinduism, which is like a third-rate pamphlet attacking Hinduism on its mythologies. Very bad. And if you read it, you feel that why this man has this much hatred for Hinduism. The answer for that lies in a particular appendix in the same book. So here he says that the same, the Riddles of Hinduism. He says, democracy needs a spiritual basis. It is not just a political form. It is a way of life. It needs a spiritual basis. And that spiritual basis can come only from the concept of Brahman. He calls it Brahmaism, the concept of Brahman. That you and I are the part of the same cosmic principle. And he says the two Upanishad Mahavakyas, Aham Brahmasmi and Tattvamasi. He says these two form the best basis for spiritual democracy, the spiritual basis for social democracy. Without these things, you can never have social democracy. Then he takes on the Abrahamic religions. He says there are people who say that we are all children of one God, and that is the basis of democracy, but that is a very shaky basis. Those particular states that base their democracy on this particular faith, that we are all children of one God, they can never have proper democracy. Democracy can be had. A social democracy can be had only when you have this particular Advaitic statements. He says this. Then he says the real riddle is, Hindus have this. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, the next one. Go. Yeah. Then he says the real riddle is, Hinduism has this spiritual basis for democracy, the best spiritual basis for democracy, and he says before the Greeks, before Plato, before the West even thought of democracy, India had democracy. India had democracy because of this particular spiritual basis. Then why Hindus lost that? This is the real riddle. You put this riddle proper. If you solve this particular riddle, then everything else falls into the place. Everything else becomes proper, clearly understood. So he put this particular most important thing in a book that is supposed to be highly condemning Hinduism in a very bad way, shows where actually his heart lies. In fact, you can read the quotation of Swami Vivekananda also. It also says the same. There is no other religion as lofty as Hinduism when it comes to talk about the grandeur of humanity, but no other religion has trampled upon a human being through, of course, the caste system and identity and things. So here again you find Swami Vivekananda and Dr. Ambedkar converging on the same wavelength. Now you will find that this is a consistency. Can we go to the previous slide? Can we go? Yeah. This is something again, it is not a straight thought of Dr. Ambedkar. In Annihilation of Caste, Ambedkar says, you want to create a new society, then you create it through the Upanishadic concepts. Again he says here, the Upanishadic Mahavakyas should be the basis of spiritual democracy. Then during the parliamentary debate, when the communists and socialists were questioning that there should be free speech and other things, that India should be democracy and all those things, then again Dr. Ambedkar, when he was answering the communists and the socialists, he said, this particular democratic setup has been there in Buddhist Sanghas, and then he said, more importantly, this particular Buddhist Sangha structure has been borrowed by Buddha from pre-Buddhist Upanishadic eras. So from the pre-Buddhist administrative setup, they have followed this democratic setup. Now, so Dr. Ambedkar was very clear in his concept. He wanted Hinduism, almost you can say that there may be a lot of places where we may differ with Dr. Ambedkar, but his intentions were clear. what he said was, India has to become strong, Hindus have to be united politically and socially. And caste system is fragmenting Hindus. Hindus have a spiritual basis, a spiritual unity. And that spiritual unity has to be realized in the real time, in the real world, where there are clash of civilizations. Here, in fact, when he was talking about the coming struggle, he is essentially talking about decades before Samuel Huntington, he is talking about clash of civilizations. So he even said there should be a federation of Dharmic states. All the Buddhist states and India should come together to stop the spread of communism. He talked about it much, and he said that the Panchashila that Nehru was talking about, he said Panchashila is a Buddhist doctrine. What is it doing in foreign policy? And you know that Mao has no respect for Buddha, and we are talking about Panchashila in foreign policy. He has written that also. So if you see essentially, and in 1916 he writes about cow worship. The missionaries foolishly attack Hindus of worshipping the cow, but it is a very scientific concept, he says. For an agricultural nation like India, worshipping or venerating cow is a very scientific thing. And then if you see the preamble of Indian Constitution, you find almost the same thing. So there is a consistency of thought. He says the cow and their progeny has to be protected. They have to be protected for the sake of agriculture and ecosystem. And there is an interesting thing that a Christian priest who is into this Dalit liberation, he has written a book on Dr. Ambedkar, and he particularly mentions about an incident. A famous Kerala-based convert to Christianity, he talked to Dr. Ambedkar, and he asked Ambedkar, at that time British government was at the top, he said, you are talking about getting converted to Buddhism, why don't you get converted to Christianity? In that case, we can have a lot of concessions from the government. Then Dr. Ambedkar says, this is very important, he says, moving from the present day Hinduism to Buddhism is like going from one room to another. But moving from Hinduism to Christianity is going from one house to another, leaving one's home and going to another house. So the point is, Dharma starts with Dr. Ambedkar. He gave us that particular metaphor, going from one particular house to another particular house. Right? So, in fact, he says, Hinduism became caste-ridden, Hinduism became socially stagnant when it stopped the conversion. He wants, there are many places where Ambedkar can be said to be more Savarkarite than Savarkar. He says at one particular point, for example, in Thoughts on Pakistan, now if you say this particular thing, it will look very cruel actually. In Thoughts on Pakistan, at one particular point, he says he takes the proposal of Veer Savarkar. Veer Savarkar says, okay, we will give an autonomous region for Muslims, but that autonomous region for Muslims will be under the control of Hindustan. And Dr. Ambedkar says, this is nonsense. You don't do this. If you want to have them, defeat them. He says this, I am not saying, please. Defeat them. You make sure that they are homogeneous with the majority of the population, and then you can have them. Otherwise, you just partition the country. You remove their language, you remove their cultural, spiritual differences, you make them part of the same spiritual, cultural mass of India. If you can't do that, you give them a separate land. So, this is the kind of statement. And again, in the case of Kashmir, he says, if you cannot save entire Kashmir, at least save our people. Let Muslims do whatever they want to. He is very blunt in all these things. I am only quoting Dr. Ambedkar, okay? I am not saying anything of my own opinion. He says, let us save our people. Let Muslims do anything they want. Let us save our people. That is the kind of, and he talks of Jawaharlal Nehru, particularly in the context of East Pakistan. He says that Jawaharlal Nehru is consumed by Muslim mania. So, you see a nationalist here who sees that the Hindus are hopelessly divided. They are a political minority. They have to come together. The situation is very critical. If they can't come together, what he thought was, okay, at least we will convert these people to Buddhism, and we would somehow save them. And the Buddhism that Dr. Ambedkar talks about, again, in his work on Buddha and Karl Marx, he says that Buddhism is derived from Upanishadic principles and also from Sankhya. So, his idea of Buddhism is also basically, it is Hindu rooted. you have to see it entirely in the context of a cultural nationalism. You will find that Dr. Ambedkar was as much a cultural nationalist and as much a Vedantist as Veer Savarkar and Swami Vivekananda. We'll go to the last report. Can we go to the next page? Yeah, next. Yeah. And now I will come to the preamble of the Constitution. We are talking about the preamble of the Constitution as having secular and socialist, and when a member of the parliament, Shah, he wanted to include these two terms, secular and socialist, Dr. Ambedkar objected to it. He said no. At the same time, there is a very important difference in the preamble of Indian Constitution and the preamble of United States Constitution that is being brought out by an eminent jurist, one R.G. Chaturvedi. Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, they published a book called Vedanta, the Modern Approach. In that, Professor Arvind Sharma has written a beautiful article on how Vedanta and the modern concept of human rights and things can gel together, and how Vedanta envisions this. In this particular thing, he quotes this jurist R.G. Chaturvedi. He says that in the case of the preamble of American Constitution, he says that it is to establish justice, whereas in the case of Indian Constitution, it is to secure justice. And he says that that means for the United States, whatever they implement is justice. Whereas in the case of India, justice is a primordial reality. And he says that this is connected to the Vedic concept of Rita, essentially, Dharma and Rita. And so, whatever we do, whatever the parliament does, whatever the parliament does is only an approximation towards that primordial reality. We move more and more towards it. So, this much clarity of thought has been there in Dr. Ambedkar in framing the Constitution. He was a thoroughgoing Vedantist. And he was also an extreme nationalist, as you can see in this last talk of the Constituent Assembly. He said that he gave a narrative, to use the same word. He talked about how during Qasim's invasion, the Tagir was defeated because of the treachery of Hindus. And how Prithviraj Chauhan was defeated against Gori by the treachery of Hindus. How when Shivaji was fighting against Aurangzeb, some of our own Hindu kings sided with Aurangzeb. Then he said how during 1857 some of the Sikhs were not ready to join the battle, and then he said this thing should not be repeated and we should protect our nation with our last blood. So see the whole thing. He is talking about Prithviraj Chauhan to Veer Shivaji to 1857. It is one whole flawless narrative. So if you see the whole thing from a holistic perspective, Dr. Ambedkar is the nationalist. The only person who can vote is us, nobody else. No. But you may ask, one last question is that, you may ask, then what about all those things that Dr. Ambedkar said against Hinduism? They are quoting it. There is an acid test. We can take all the things that Dr. Ambedkar said against Hinduism, we can put it into this particular way of perceiving Dr. Ambedkar, and still this particular thing will stand. But those who use Dr. Ambedkar's quotes against Hinduism, they can't take all these dimensions, the crucial dimensions of Dr. Ambedkar and put it into their narrative. It will collapse. So that shows that Dr. Ambedkar is essentially as a Hindu nationalist and a Vedantic promoter. Thank you.